there. Welcome to today's episode. I've got my conversation from today, this morning, with Bill B. in D.C. We had a wonderful conversation. Started actually really personal and very funny, a lot of laughs throughout, and then obviously got on to everything that's going on with Putin's invasion in Ukraine. And then the legend, Tim Wise, sat down with me last week as well. So 2 great conversations. It's a stand-up light, as I like to call it, when I don't have all the bells and whistles. It feels like it's got to be a show. If you're going to call it a show, I don't like when people call their interview show a show. It's like, now you sat down and taped a conversation and posted it up. I do that too. It's not a show. When I got Pete Coe's intro and news dump, and I've got all the different news segments and different levels and 2 guests and all the music and everything else, that's a show. But this is 2 awesome interviews, and it's because last night my parents were in town, my family was here, and I took the night off from doing a whole show. So there you go. If you hear the intro, you know I'm going to have most likely a news segment, and it's a whole show. If you hear Pete Coe's voice, and sometimes he gets the day off as well. All right, hopefully that clears that up. Thank you very much for your support. As always, I think you're going to like today's, not show, but conversations, today's interviews, today's guests. I got Tim Wise, I got Bill B. in D.C., who this audience really likes. You guys really like him. And if you don't like him, if you have issues with him, if you get arguments, he would love to talk to you about them. He'd love to discuss them. Very accessible guy. You can follow him on Twitter at Bill B. in D.C. You can park in his garages if you're ever in D.C., because he's really just a business guy, a business owner, and a smart all-around D.C. insider guy. A lot of people think he's a special agent. He's not. He just has a lot of experience. He remembers a lot of things that he read and learned, and he talks to a whole bunch of in-the-know people in D.C. That's why we call him that. Former caller, then friend, now guest. Here we go. Bill B.
Peter.
Pumpkin eater. I hated that so much.
You hated what so much?
When everybody would do that to me when I was in like first grade, kindergarten.
Call you Peter?
They would call me Peter Pumpkin Eater.
Oh, yeah. I was just going with the Peter. Yeah.
I mean, you didn't think in my head I would hear Pumpkin Eater?
I did not, actually. It didn't really occur to me, I have to admit. And then this is Bill Boyle tinfoil you're talking to.
Oh, I didn't realize I was talking to Bill Boyle tinfoil. Yeah. Well, Pumpkin Eater.
I was once called Dildo Daggins once, too.
No, you were called Dildo Daggins?
I was, except that I had the presence of mind to laugh uproariously at it, and it never happened.
Yes, well done. That's what you got to do. Took me a little while to learn that. I figured that out early, luckily, but... Yeah. And I probably did learn it from Pumpkin Eater at some point. But I'm sure, knowing me, I snapped and had a negative emotional reaction first. Like, well, I don't eat pumpkins. What are you Why are you? It's April. No one's thinking. Why are you doing this to me?
Oh, right. See, I think I just sobbed for a while. And then I realized after being, this happening many times with my many vicious older siblings, that either one of them said, okay, buddy, like, here's what you do, or I just figured it out, but I don't think I was like cool hand Luke about this stuff until I was 15 or something. So.
Well, since we're talking about this stuff before we get to Ukraine, because I know you really well, I know you're a multifaceted, multi-layered fella. How do you deal with anger in general? Have you had any issues with it?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up a very angry kid.
You did?
Super angry kid. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Family stuff going on that made
because of your face, or
no, it was the penis size. But
yeah, well, that can breed a lot of contempt.
It's too damn big.
Christian Finnegan does this joke. He says, he had heart surgery, and to get into it, he goes, I recently had very serious surgery. And everybody just kind of, there's a lull, and he lets it sit there, and he goes, penis reduction. Actually, yes. Really. So you had a similar surgery. Anyway, why were you angry?
Just, family stuff, I grew up with, and lots of it, and not fun family stuff. And just, I was pretty pissed off. I was a bad little guy to pick a fight with in high school, because I had easy access to an endless amount of rage that I would tap into and just turn into like a...
Is that because you had multiple siblings who beat you, and that's a thing? When you have brothers and sisters, older brothers and sisters who beat you up, you get used to...
I had a terribly alcoholic mother. My siblings actually were quite good, and we were a team for sure. And you can't beat up your mother, so the rest of the world becomes the destination for your knuckles when you're that pissed off. And so that sort of I had a lot of rage, and as I got older, I initially did not deal with it well, but going through college and thereafter, a little therapy and a little growing up, and I don't think I really have that in me at all anymore.
It's gone.
It's not gone, but it's definitely it's been what's the word? It's been worked into my life that I express my anger in healthy ways, and I don't do it in unhealthy ways anymore. And I'm not an angry person at all. I don't think I would have been if I had grown up in sort of a neutral environment. And so but it's it's funny. I mean, I got to tell you, like, I'm that guy boxing that, like, somebody smashes me in the face and I'm like, now I'm awake.
Yeah, but that's different. Like I think people think probably that fighting or martial arts or even MMA is somehow a result of the person being angry and violent. I'm sure disproportionately they are, but it's certainly not required. And certainly right. Learning how to fight can lead to quelling your anger in all kinds of different ancient methods, of course, that require discipline and meditation, and that discipline that you learn in fighting or martial arts applies to every single thing in your life about not reacting, etc.
Well, I think I told you this a long time ago.
Or so I'm told.
No, exactly. No, the thing that I loved about fighting was that feeling. It wasn't hitting the other guy. It was that feeling of you get smashed in the face as hard as this big dude can hit you. Mm. And you realize, this isn't that big of a deal.
Oh, wow. I've never had that experience. When I've gotten smashed in the face, even lightly, I've gone down.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm 190 pounds. So when boxing, I fought heavyweights.
Jeez.
And I got to tell you, it was pretty fun. And but it definitely boxing is a head game. And learning how to deal with the stress of that, being in the ring with someone who's hitting you, and you need to strategize your way through a fight. Like, anyone who tells you to just go in the ring and throw punches is a knockout candidate par excellence. You have to fight with your head. You have to be very smart about it. And that has a lot of rollover effects into life in general. When you're in an emotionally stressful situation, instead of going, you think, okay, I just got metaphorically popped in the nose. How am I going to deal with this? And it definitely helps. It's you don't meet a ton of boxers who are sort of rage monsters. Most of them are the opposite. Most of them are actually pretty chill.
Yeah.
And it's because they're used to dealing, and they've learned how to deal with things not going their way.
They probably learn how to deal with people picking fights with them too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's some of that. There's definitely.
How long did you box for? How serious?
I did Chinese boxing, and I did regular boxing and a couple other things, probably really seriously, for about 15 years.
Oh, wow.
I was on the Chinese boxing part. I'm the guy who's terrible technique, but good at fighting. If that makes sense. So you would
only box Chinese people?
No, Pete, that's a little racist.
Oh,
it's called Chinese boxing. Kung Fu is Chinese boxing.
Oh, it is, really?
That's what they call it Chinese boxing in particular.
I think boxing, I think hands, and I think Kung Fu, and I think legs, but I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So it's all about using the sort of movie Kung Fu stuff in the ring, like you're in a regular fight. And so you actually get to use it, all that.
You should do a Chinese boxing podcast.
I don't know enough. And the guys who do know enough are like as nerded out about it as any nerd.
Well, I only suggested it because you sound like you're pretty nerded out about it, but you're pretty nerded out about a lot of things, which is why probably should get to the thing you're nerding out most about, which is Putin's invasion. Probably puts you and the invasion down by saying you're nerding out about it, comparing it to anything else. But why are you how? I thought I wanted to start by how closely are you paying attention? What are people talk about the Bill Boyle behind his back, and they don't really understand why the Bill Boyle knows what he knows. So when you are watching a situation unfold such as this, clearly you have studied the history of the region. clearly you know and understand the history of Americans' national security reactions and apparatuses and techniques and strategies. You obviously understand geopolitics, all of it. But like, how are you taking in the information right now? What does it look like? You're reading articles, you're talking to people, you're listening to interviews. What does the Bill Boyle do?
So I'm talking to people mostly. And then the other thing that I'm doing is I am figuring out, particularly on Twitter, who is discernibly smarter and better informed than anyone else. And that, again, you know, as you said, I'm a nerd about the history. I'm a nerd about the political history, the military history, the geopolitics of it all, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, it's, I think, hard for someone who doesn't know a lot of that stuff to figure out who is not bullshit. Right?
Yeah, no, I was going to suggest that. It's funny you said it, but I think that for you, probably your strength is your ability to discern people and sources. And you have that ability for a lot of different reasons. But I think I think a lot of people depend on folks like you and their Twitter and social media presences to introduce us to sources that you have vetted out and kind of think and find reliable. But I guess I don't know why you have such a good level of discernment on an issue like this. What are we looking for? Who are we looking for? And how do you know that shit is not just straight up propaganda? And how do you adjust for that? Even when it's obviously your own bias.
Right, exactly. I mean, the big thing is to means test the people you're talking to, or the people that you're reading. You know, if someone follows my Twitter feed, they'll get a group of people who I have definitely followed for a while and watched how their prognostications came true or did not come true. And sometimes these people were wrong, but if they were wrong for the right reasons, I'm okay with that. You know, and I'll give you a good example. There's this guy, Trent Talenko. He's the guy who came up with the whole thing about the Russian trucks and the tires not being maintained, right? And that was do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do actually. Yes. And I think you said something about they bought their tires, you know, from China. Yeah.
And how it has a lot to say about corruption in the Russian military and how badly they planned for this, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that guy these days is going off about all kinds of other stuff that he doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground about. and so you have to, you know, even if someone's right, like within their expertise, they're right on a thing. If they start you know, he suddenly became a Twitter superstar, and now he can't stop himself. And he writes about all this other shit that he doesn't know about very well. A good example being the Germans have these 100 Marder infantry fighting vehicles, which Ukraine offered to buy. Germany said, no, we already paid to have them destroyed into scrap metal, and we're going to continue to do that. And this guy and other people picked it up from him. They're going, oh, shit, this is such bullshit. The Germans could just give them these, et cetera, et cetera. They're all wrong. Okay, if you give the Ukrainians weapons they haven't used before, you then have to give them the entire logistical train that will support them. A Marder infantry fighting vehicle where you can't fix the clutch if it breaks is useless to you, right? And so, among other reasons, it's, you know, why I now look at that guy and go, okay, you were really good about this one thing, but now you're launching into things you don't know
I think
about.
that's a really important observation for everybody to always make. And it's such a good point you made about how you get popular over here for one thing. It might be a fluke even. And then you start espousing your beliefs and opinions on things that you should not even be in the lane. And I've, by the way, made an amazing career out of that myself. But moving on, let's get
wait, hold on. I have to fight that. You've always said, I don't know jack shit, but I bring on people who do.
Yeah, no, I'm being self-deprecating. I have a similar sense of discernment as you do. It's different, and it's certainly not on the same issues, but it's the quality. That's certainly my whole bread and butter, as I've been able to find smart people. And I'm most proud of people like you, who I met through, they were interested enough in my show, they became callers, and I became impressed enough to ask, you know, for more. And then obviously we became very close personal friends years ago. And now you're a regular guest here on the podcast, and folks love you. And those are the best kinds of finds, actually, because you didn't set out for a media career, and you're still not. And here we are just chatting. And so I love that. All right, let's get to specifically, though, what I really wanted to talk with you about, although I'm glad that we talked for the last 13 minutes about everything that we did, because it's awesome. It's always awesome talking to you about anything. And by the way, I will tease that I invited people to your house in late April without telling you last night. And then I did tell you, but I want you to know, just to be clear, I said, yeah, we'll probably get together at Bill's sometime that week. And then I texted you and I was like, hey, man, are you around this?
I was really hoping
already
that was
planned
a joke,
it.
but okay, fine.
Yeah. What did you say?
I said I was really hoping that was a joke, but okay, fine.
Yeah. I mean, we'll try to keep it limited to 8 to 10 people or something.
Yeah, got it.
We'll vet them all at the door. Okay, so Ukraine, we are here in the first week of April. This began on February 24th, and almost nobody, including probably Zelensky and a lot of Ukrainians, maybe not, thought that we would be quite where we are, which seems to be a retreat of sorts, although I'm sure you're going to have some kind of issues with semantics and words and who's saying them and why. And then even, I think, significantly, a small invasion, if you will, into Russia territory by Ukraine. A helicopter went in, attacked and returned, which sounds like some real Red Dawn shit. And I have very few references, so that's what I always go with. And finally, though, of course, what we have seen over the weekend in images from Ukraine, which is just the worst type of war crimes. Women, if my understanding, handcuffed, naked, dead. Other people handcuffed, naked, dead. Mass graves. And then the reports now of what the Russian soldiers did, which, is probably comparable to the worst types of war crimes by any military force in history. Is that too far to say? So that's my recap.
Sure. And you want my where I think things stand basically at this point?
React to anything. React to any of that you want.
Okay. I think, the Ukrainians took back the grounds of Chernobyl. So they're back all the way to the Belarusian border already. They broke the sieges of the various cities in the Northeast already. They're going to drive the Russians all the way back to the border, all the way down basically to the Donbass. So the entire northern attack of the Russians, which was probably 60 or 70% of their entire military power brought into this fight, has been driven back in disarray. They didn't rout completely. They didn't get destroyed. But their ability to fight is going to be really, really degraded. What the Russians are going to do is swing those folks around to the Donbass, which is the far eastern chunk where the Russians had invaded and taken over in 2014. And they're going to try their best to pinch off a big chunk of territory there. And about a half of Ukraine's military is there. And the Russians are hoping that they can reinforce that and take a bunch of territory before the Ukrainians can move their reinforcements they don't need anymore from Kiev and bring them down there to have that fight. And so this is plan D, E, F, G. I don't know where the Russians are on. And it's much more of a stand-up fight out in the steppe, out in open grassland, which is not great for someone whose strategy is all about ambush and short range attacks on supply columns. So this is a better place for the Russians to be fighting. It's where they should have put everything, frankly, in the beginning. That being said, the Ukrainians are fighting ferociously here too, just like everywhere else. And the Ukrainians know that if they win this fight, they've won the war.
Right.
It's over at that point. The Ukrainians are also getting tons and tons and tons of supply. So as the Russians are moving their folks around, it's a race between whether these beaten, shitty, badly mauled Russian units can make a difference there before the Ukrainians are able to adjust and reinforce it.
Right.
And, it's a much denser combat environment. It's not these, this is trench lines, and it's more like World War I, where they're going to be fighting. And if you're, the Russians, their benefit or their biggest talent is massed artillery fire. So if the Ukrainians have to, in order to win here, have to, consolidate their units into big groups, the Russians are going to have an advantage. That being said, I think the Russians are adjusting only in the crudest ways. The Ukrainians' ability to adjust seems to be endless. And they have all the esprit de corps, all the elan, all of the morale that I think if I had to bet right now, I would say the Ukrainians win this war outright. Which is not what I was saying, earlier. And by the way, you're one of those few people who knows I've been periodically freaking out about a Russian invasion of Ukraine for how many years now?
Yeah, for forever. You've been, for sure.
Yeah.
Talking about it. And that's also why apparently, and I think I'm sure you told me this, but one of the things I've, had drilled into my head over the past few weeks and hearing expert conversations about it is how long NATO had been training the Ukrainian military. And if you had, thought more about that, maybe you would have been maybe less surprised by some of the tactics and weaponry familiarity they had with weaponry that they used. And maybe, even the skill sets of the guys that are using them. So I don't know. It's
in a way, what we did is we taught, after losing in Afghanistan, we taught the Ukrainians to be the Taliban on steroids, right? Imagine the Taliban if they were as heavily armed as we were when we went into Afghanistan in 2000.
I do think there's I think every time anybody makes a comparison, it does an injustice to both peoples, but specifically because of how tribal Afghanistan is as opposed to Ukraine. Like so much of the issue with fighting in Ukraine was.
I'm actually complimenting the Afghans. I'm saying the Afghans were incredibly poorly armed and they still fought us to a standstill and eventually pushed us out.
Oh, you're talking about the Taliban. I thought you were talking about anything, the Afghans fighting the Taliban.
I'm saying the Taliban.
No, I give them for sure.
We would have lost.
Yeah.
And I think that what's happening here in great part is the U.S. and NATO being able to look at itself and how it fought in that war and flipping the script and teaching the Ukrainians how to fight the other way, which tells you quite a bit about the intellectual, bandwidth that NATO and the U.S. have, that they could literally analyze their own failures and say, okay, here's how you do the same thing to somebody else. Let's train the Ukrainians on how to do this. Let's arm them so it becomes incredibly effective and that they're not totally undergunned. And then actually teach them how to deploy. The Ukrainians only have 15 large military units that are mobile. Everybody else is spread out through the country. And that absolutely completely fucked the Russians up. And it's genius. I mean, there's a potential revolution in warfare happening right now in that the average infantryman can destroy a tank. And that is going to change a whole lot in the world. And what we're seeing in this war is the Russians were not within 20 miles of even thinking about that.
Right.
And the West and the Ukrainians were very much so, and really operationalizing it, figuring out how to do it. And, Russia in this sort of setup would have blown through a lot of armies 20 years ago. Now they're getting absolutely slaughtered. And it's funny. No one really started talking or has continued to talk about what Russian casualties must look like. I think we were at 16,000 2 weeks ago. I can't even imagine.
Well, I was going to ask you how the levels of violence have changed. Has it become more intense? The types of fighting, what is in terms of missiles and bombs, and obviously infantry. It seems, and maybe it's because media is not paying as close attention. Maybe it's because I'm not. Obviously, I think everybody did as good a job as possible documenting the horrific war crimes we're seeing. But is the level of violence changing as it seems the Russians are retreating, and is it just a pause and they'll be on the offensive again, destroying cities?
So I think that the level of violence around Kiev was incredibly intense up until about 4 days ago. And this was street fighting, forest fighting, drones pinpointing units for artillery, that sort of thing. That, of course, has gone way down because the Russians are just running. There's a picture somebody sent me. An entire Russian company dropped all of its gear, radios, bulletproof vests, ammunition, guns, everything but their boots and their shirts, in their desperation to swim across a river to get away from the Ukrainians. So the tempo of the war in the north is the Russians just getting the fuck out as fast as possible. In the far northeast, it's a holding action. They just don't want to be pushed all the way back to their border. I don't think they're going to have any choice in the next week. It's in the southeast that it's going to be really intense, and it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight. And, all the remnants of these units from the north are just going to be pumped right into there because it's a race that's on now. Even though the Russians would love to reconstitute these units and get them sorted out and get their equipment sorted out, if they think they're on the verge of a breakthrough in the south, they can't wait. They just got to throw them in. So you're going to have units that lost half their officers and 20% of their men and getting mauled to pieces in Irpin are suddenly going to get thrown into a fight down in Izium. And that's sort of like a good illustration of what happens in a war like this. This happened to the Germans in World War II on the Eastern Front as well, where they never really got a chance to reconstitute because there were always emergencies or opportunities popping up where they had to take advantage because they knew if they waited, the other guy was going to be prepared for that.
Right.
And that's what wears an army out when you just can't reconstitute. And this, by the way, gets to a bigger question, which is that Russia's running out of men. When you see these people talk about, oh my God, Russia's such a bigger country, there's no way they're going to lose. They just have to keep on pressing. Russia hasn't declared war yet, which means that it can't force its conscript soldiers, 134 of them, however many are left alive right now. They can't force them to fight, right? They can pressure them to sign up as their long-term contracts. They can, do some other things to make them kind of stay around for a bit longer. But those troops are supposed to walk off the field, I think, at the end of this month. And then they're bringing on another batch of 100 and whatever thousand men who they have to then train and arm and uniform, right? And that's what they're limited to unless Putin literally declares war, which lets him keep everybody on the field and which lets him sort of take on all these war powers in Russia. And then he can bring more men into it and more material, except that he has then just admitted to everyone in Russia that this little police actions are flat out war.
Right.
Politically, that's really bad. And also that's what starts to get people going, what the fuck did we get into? I thought this guy said this was going to be, he went on forever saying this is going to be a chip shot. No big deal. We're going to slap these Nazis around and it's over. Then he's got to go and say, oops, sorry. We're in like a war to the death.
One could reasonably argue that declaring war will unify any country, though.
It will. I mean, Russians for a while are going to be unified. They're more unified now than they were then. We think those polls are being done in an authoritarian country. I don't necessarily buy it. I know Julia and I kind of disagree about this. I don't buy necessarily that Russians love this. The number of VPN, the VPN is a thing that allows you in a country like Russia to get free internet access from the censors. Well, then the amount of people using VPNs in Russia is skyrocketing right now. So you're hearing on the one hand, 81% of the people in Russia support this. On the other hand, millions and millions of them are going out of their way to get Western media. That doesn't seem to me like a
how do you know that? Like, and how are they going out of their way? Like, what can they do? It's interesting to know what access to media is like in China, North Korea, or in this case, Russia. Just how that, like, when you go to type in a website, what happened?
It just says it's like 404. You can't get it. That's it. Google News got blocked. Facebook got blocked. I mean, I've been in Turkey where I couldn't get a website that the government of Turkey deemed, uncool. I don't even know what it was. It was like ABC News or something. I mean, you just don't get access if the browser can tell where your location is, right? So you get a VPN so that you basically create a situation in which the browser can't tell what state you're in, what country you're in.
Ah, right.
And then you can go anywhere. Well, people in Russia are rushing to get VPNs. That is not the thing you do if you're super happy with what state media is telling you. Right? I mean, it's just not. And so I don't really know. And I don't think anyone really does know what Russians think, especially because we don't know what Russians are going to know about what they've done 6 months from now. I think and by the way, the war crimes in Irpin and Bucha are just awful. I mean, we're talking, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's up close pictures of a woman who was raped and murdered and had a swastika burned onto her body. I did
see that image.
Yeah. There's a 14-year-old boy who was shot, executed. There's torture rooms. There's all of the worst things. And I think that will filter back into Russia over time. And of course, the usual people will deny it, but I just don't, you don't want to be the baddies, right? And nobody does. And even if people sort of mouth the bullshit line they're given by the government, in their hearts, most of them don't believe it. And I think that for Russia, I think Putin will not get kicked out of power anytime soon, but he's going to have an economy collapsing. Say he tries a wartime economy, fine. He still has an economy collapsing. Yes, he has all these stockpiles of tanks and everything that are from like 1980. Half of that shit won't work. I think they're going to have an incredibly hard time fielding another major army.
Let me go back. Okay. Well, that'll be interesting to see, of course, obviously, and there's a lot to be spoken about. But I do just want to go back to those images we saw and the reporting that we heard and the videos of just bodies littered through the streets. Yeah. A really hard weekend, I just think, for people, seeing those images was just in the energy and in the air and in the ether for anybody who saw them throughout your weekend, I think. And it seemed to be kind of the worst type of thing. I'm glad they showed those images, as horrific as they are. And those are all human beings with lives and families and histories. And what does those, do we believe that is there anything to be questioned about those images? I'm sure there are people right now making YouTube videos saying they're crisis actors lying there. And I'm sure there's, Jimmy Dore saying something like this. Yeah, can't even hypothetically imagine. But how do we know those videos and images are from Ukraine and those dead Ukrainians killed by Russians and all the things that we heard reported are real and accurate and not some kind of exaggeration or propaganda?
Well, a couple things we know. For instance, a large proportion of the troops that went in were Rosguardia, which were and Oman, who are riot police and public order military police or public order wings of effectively the FSB. So
these are citizens, military members from the country of Oman.
No, Oman is a Russian word. They are Russians. They are Russian. Russian street.
You sure they're not the fearsome Omanian mercenary force?
No. Yeah, Oman's clear. They're clear on this.
I just want to clear that up for everybody. They are not implicated in any way.
Sorry, all Omanis with an A. This is Oman with an O. And
if you'd only said that, it would have been clear to everyone. Of course.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead. These are a specific type of Russian
control, like crowd control and societal control police, right? And they were reporting. The U.S. reported that the Russians were coming in with lists of people to be executed or jailed, right? We knew, and it was what Russia did in other places. We knew they were coming in with lists of people that they wanted to grab and with plans to control the governments in the places they were. And so there's not there was no idea of these are not just regular military units there and nobody else. And oopsie daisy, somebody got shot by mistake. They had a systematic plan to knock out the political structure that was against them anywhere they were. And so you see the one mayor and his entire family got killed. The guy you see who's down the sort of drain, tortured and dumped into that hole, he was the mayor of that town. And they killed the rest of his family because he refused to cooperate with them. So this isn't just sort of out of the blue, boom, suddenly dead people. Who could have imagined? This is a thing Russia did in Chechnya. This is a thing that Russia did in the Donbass in 2014. And so there's history for it. There's also Zachistka is a Russian term, which means evacuating or room clearing operations, but it's a Russian euphemism for clean a place out. And by clean a place out, that means wipe the people out that are there. And they did this in, I think it was in Chechnya. They basically, when they pulled out of an area, they went into every house and found every man between 16 and 60 and shot him to death in front of his house when they pulled out of towns. And that's exactly what you see in those pictures. On some of them, you see a body in front of every house. And it looks quite like what something they've done before looks like. And so, I don't think there's going to be in the end any doubt about who did this and why. This was done partly out of just policy.
I just want to say I wouldn't be so sure about that because of the doubt that gets created that allows the lady at the Trump rally this weekend to say that Trump killed Osama bin Laden.
Well, of course.
We actively see these videos be made and narratives be spread. And I absolutely hope you're right. And I think probably in the mainstream, that'll be the case. I hope. But
yeah, if you're a Jimmy Dore fan or if you're a Donald Trump fan, you can fuck off out of this conversation right now. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking.
Well, there goes a huge percentage.
Yeah, there you go. Damn it. There goes the audience. I'm talking about, people of goodwill with normal brains who aren't conspiracy theorists. It's going to be really obvious what happened here. And I think there's going to be war crimes trials that come of it. And by the way, kind of reverting back to the big picture on this, the fact that the Russians did this strategically is so fucking dumb. It's
what do you
amazing.
mean? Did what strategically?
The fact that they committed war crimes.
Oh, right.
And did it in a very okay, you're beating us militarily, so fuck you. We're going to rape and murder your citizens. It makes it that much easier for support to be maintained for a longer war. It's why.
Yes, which is why you have to question, just because of the horrific kind of, I don't know, what kind of person can do such a thing. You have to question, is that a strategy that came from an order on high? Did that come from Putin? Did that come from a general? Who did that come from? What security leadership person? Or was it possibly and likely these guys they're broken, they're angry, they're on their way out, and they're just vicious beasts. How much of it is strategy and organized, and how much of it is these guys just doing this to some extent on their own?
Well, I think it doesn't matter, frankly.
You're right. The outcome doesn't matter. I do just wonder if that's because it's worse if it's ordered. No?
Right. So here's the thing, right? The Russian military has been doing this for a long time. As I said, they did it in Chechnya. They did it in the Donetsk Basin in 2014. They've been doing it forever. So there's only two options here, one of which is the Russian government doesn't know and doesn't care, or that it does know and considers it the sort of policy of frightfulness to be useful.
Terror.
And if they really didn't want it to happen, they've had multiple examples in the last 20 years where it did.
Great point.
Where they could have put a stop to it. So the obvious,
or they could have prosecuted, and maybe they did. They could have prosecuted them in their own country as war criminals, as from time to time we even do, like we did to several guys in Afghanistan that fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, obviously. But what that does is it creates an expectation, maybe. That you could be held responsible for this when the war is over. You could be, but anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Here's a good example. I think it's a town called, I want to say Yalovonsk, which was a town in the Donets where in 2014, the Russians surrounded a Ukrainian unit there. And they couldn't take the town. And so the commander of that particular Russian unit said, hey, look, we'll create a corridor that we'll let you retreat. You guys have fought the good fight. We'll let you retreat and leave the town. Well, of course, the Ukrainians agreed to that because they were more innocent then. And when they went to retreat from the town down the agreed upon corridor, the Russians shelled the corridor and killed 400 of them. Ugh. That guy, that commander, just got killed in southern Russia about 2 weeks ago, the Russian commander. And that's why I know about the story, because Ukrainians were like,
right, wow,
yeah, the butcher of Yalvansk is dead.
Right.
And so, there's this sort of mentality that if we can just be frightful enough, we can fucking scare people into not fighting us. It's exactly, by the way, the strategy and the mentality of the German army in 1941 in Russia. And you would think the Russians would have learned from that if you tell people there's nothing they can do that's going to keep them from getting completely raped and mutilated and murdered except fight us, then everyone's going to fight you. Right? It's like the Russians missed out on the most important historical lesson they should have gotten from World War II. And they're trying to be the same thing.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it there because I want to actually try to get this up as soon as possible. Cool. So, as always, great talking to you. Always learn a lot. Appreciate your perspective. And I'll let you go. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm really positive it was unlikely to be me to have been the guy who put the big sunflower sticker on the back door of the Russian embassy on 16th Street. Not me. Don't know who did it. Totally.
Huh. Well, if you do find out who did that, I hope that you'll report them to the.
I 100%. Well, we could do a what's the term for it? A fundraiser for that person's potential bail.
It was your son. It was your son, wasn't it?
He was filming.
Bill, thank you.
All right, buddy. See ya.
All right, there he goes, Bill B in D.C. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly learned a lot, got great insights from him, as always, and we can talk about anything, always sharing personal stuff as well, which I think is helpful and interesting, entertaining, obviously pretty funny there at times as well. I think he committed a crime. That's what I think. Go report him. Okay, so now I've got a great conversation with Tim Wise. This guy is obviously always hits home runs. He is one of the smartest and most articulate and passionate people I talk to here on the show, and we talk regularly. He is, of course, an anti-racism educator. He's the author of 9 books, and he's got an awesome essay. He writes awesome essays over at Medium, timjwise.medium.com, which you can subscribe to. He has a massive following on Twitter. I think you should add yourself to it if you aren't already following Tim on Twitter. It's at Tim Jacob Wise. And we caught up last week. We talked a little bit about the slap because it was still last week, and I think it's still relevant, Tim's points, but we talked about several of his recent essays. It's always great to catch up with Tim Wise. I love this guy. I look up to him. I learn a lot from him. I know so many of you do as well. As always, if you've got issues or questions for my guests, email me. I almost give you Tim's email. My email is standupwithpete@gmail.com. I always press record before I'm planning on using it just to test levels, and Tim and I were just shooting the shit, so there's a little bit different tone the way that we start. It's a little less formal on my end, but I thought I would include it, and of course I got Tim's permission. Here it is.
And so all of the things that we see, and there are a lot of sociological literature about the connection between all of that history and crime in Black communities today, and different things that people love to put on Black people and say, there's something culturally about your people that leads them to do this, or there's something genetically, even in the case of really hardcore racists, that causes your people to behave like this. When in reality, number one, of course, we're usually exaggerating the extent to which the behavior is Black, because white folks are doing a lot of the same shit. And then number two, even to the extent we're seeing something real, good sociology, good sociological imaginations look at what the real roots of that are. And if part of that is the trauma of oppression, if part of that is the stripping of agency, if part of that is the emasculation of Black men in terms of being able to support and defend themselves and their families, then you're going to see certain things. What are you going to see? You're going to see hypermasculinity to make up for challenged masculinity. You're going to see a certain degree of homophobia. Right now, I'm one who doesn't believe that Black homophobia is worse than white homophobia. That to me is a trope that's bullshit. I think it's just standard, and it's very common among people generally, unfortunately, in the culture. But to the extent there is, and it's been talked about, sort of homophobia in the Black community, I do think that too stems in some part from the sort of attack on the notion of Black manhood. And then there's a hyper masculine,
and more probably towards homophobia towards men, not women, right? Not lesbian women.
Right. I mean, and that's not to say there isn't homophobia toward Black women who are gay, but clearly it is disproportionately aimed at other men, and that too could be connected to that. So I just want us to think about, particularly white folks who usually are not privy to those conversations, to know that they're happening, right? That those are Black conversations, and we don't need to be in those conversations. Those are conversations for us not to be in, but they are for us to understand that they're going on. Because if we understand that they're going on, it deepens our understanding when we get on Twitter and we see Black folks going at each other about the Will Smith and Chris Rock thing. And it's this sort of family battle. And we're trying to think about what do we say? But we don't have to say anything about the battle they're having. We just need to understand where that comes from and what that is. And we need to understand that some of that comes from our shit. Right? Like some of that we're seeing is not just the messiness that exists within Black communities. That's a messiness that exists because those Black communities have existed in white supremacy.
It's all got to be interconnected. And also, does it explain why, because I have so much privilege, I am unclean, pigpen-like?
I am quite certain it explains for both of us. I mean, look, I joke about it, but I joke, like, if you could see how messy my office is, I'm never going to let you see. All anybody ever sees is the bookshelf, right? But if you were to see the filth, I'm not sure
you're understanding me. You're talking about being unorganized or having a messy desk. I'm saying I don't bathe, Tim. I don't wash my body. I don't know why I need to spell this out to you. You're glad that you're virtual.
Yes. Yes. Well, that is an unfortunate thing, and I can't help you with that part. I do try to bathe daily.
All right. Well, I've been recording, but I'm going to, and I can certainly keep some of that, but I want to get to some of your latest writing and essays, which is always fantastic. So I wanted to just, get your take on, you've written about this, but I just wanted to get your take on the treatment of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, or is it judge? She a judge before? No, she's a judge, and then she becomes a justice on the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
How do you think she was treated by Democrats? And then I'll ask you, obviously, about what you think of Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, and the rest of the crew.
Well, I think that she was, the Democrats on the committee, obviously, I think, tried to make this as painless as they could for someone they knew was going to be attacked. I think Cory Booker, gave a really eloquent sort of statement. It was quite lovely. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Cory Booker. Sometimes he's a little corny to me, in the way he talks about things, but it was beautiful what he said about her and the meaning of her nomination. So I was really proud of him for what he said. I think the administration itself, maybe, I don't know if they fully recognize how incredibly vicious this was going to be for her. But, she was as eloquent as she could be and as strong as she could be in the face of what I thought was a lot of really incredibly messy, nasty stuff. So they did what they had to do. I mean, as long as they stick together and all vote in favor of her, which it seems like they're going to do, then she'll be confirmed. But I just think that they didn't do enough. If there's any area where the Democrats fell short, I think it was in publicly renouncing the racialized attacks, really, the sort of dog whistle stuff that the Republicans were doing. It's fine to know that you're probably going to get her through, but I think they should have risen in stronger public defense and been more clearly outspoken about the unacceptability of the absurd racialized dog whistles and gendered dog whistles that were being thrown at her, and not just in the hearing, but going back to, even Tucker Carlson's early attacks on the very notion of a black female justice, when she said, well, he might as well go and nominate George Floyd's sister, or he said that, yeah. He said, well, why not just nominate George Floyd's sister? Which you only say that because they're both black women. Like, that's the only reason you say it. That's not even a dog whistle. That's just like a burning cross in someone's yard. Like, that's just the craziest, most racist thing ever. And they didn't say anything in response to that. Maybe they think they're not dignifying. I know sometimes liberals think way, like, let's not dignify fascism with a response. Yeah, fascism loves that when you don't dignify them with a response. Fascists absolutely love it when you just are like, I'm too good for this. And they're like, good, because then when our tanks roll over you, you'll be too good to do anything about that either. Right. So, I mean, I do think Democrats need to call bullshit on some things in a much more blatant way. But of course, as usual, they're afraid that if they call racism, white people will get us sad, and then they won't vote for Democrats. I don't think that's true. I think what people want are folks who will fight for what they believe in. And I think they could have fought harder. But that said, I mean, they get a B- or a B on it. They pass, you
wrote a piece, newsflash, Tucker Carlson's really, really racist, and it's great. But one of the other things that he mentioned apparently during the hearings was she has the philosophy of any white liberal. Like, he was really trying to, I don't know, take her color even away from her. It was a weird thing to say and a weird tactic, but
I think that was his attempt to say that he's not racist, right? Like, that's like the right-wing racist way of saying, well, she doesn't even think like a black person. She thinks like a white liberal, and then that's not, it's his version of, I don't even think of you as black, right, which is racist as hell. Right. I mean, so it's sort of that kind of thing. It's just, he's not unracist or anti-racist enough to actually say anti-racist things, but he wants to pretend that he is. So he says things like,
how
like
important
that.
is the symbolism of a black woman there with her white husband and her mixed race kids and her very elderly, but amazing that they were able to see black parents watching her be confirmed? Because a lot of people are talking about it doesn't change the balance of the court, but that the symbolism is so important and so inspiring. You know, do you think that's...
Yeah, it's very important. It's very important. There are judges who are probably more on the left than she is ideologically and philosophically, for sure, that Biden could have chosen. There are probably some black women, if he wanted a black woman to be on the court, as he said he did, there are probably some black women who are possibly more progressive or ideologically on the quote unquote left judicially in terms of their philosophy. But you're not going to find someone who has such a really interesting background coming out of a defense background, you know, rather than a corporate background. I think that her story is really, really compelling. And I think symbolically, the importance of having a black woman, whether it was her or someone else, is critical. You know, we're living in an era where I know symbolism can be overdrawn and overclaimed. We know, for instance, that the election of Barack Obama did not fundamentally alter the power relationships in this country. But we also knew they weren't, or at least anyone who really observes American politics and thinks deeply knew that they weren't. That doesn't mean it wasn't significant. That doesn't mean it wasn't as significant as some people wanted to make it, including right wingers who wanted to use it as proof of post-raciality. And they'll do the same now. I mean, the irony is the very same people who are going to attack her and did attack her, once she's on the court, they're going to point to her as proof of how much progress we've made, right, even though if it were up to them, she wouldn't be there. That's what they did with Obama, right? It's like, well, we can't be racist. We have a black president. Well, did you vote for him? Well, no. Okay, well, then you're telling me that it had been up to you. He wouldn't have been there. But now that he's there, against your will, you're going to claim that as proof of our post-raciality. I mean, we know how this is going to play out. But the symbolism, you saw it in her daughter's eyes. You saw it on her parents' eyes and her mom. You saw it in Cory Booker's eyes. And I think, you see it. It's not just black children. I mean, it's inspiring to young women, I think, across the racial spectrum. And it should be inspiring to black folks, not just women, and I think it is. It's one of those things that if we're going to claim to be this country that's constantly becoming better and getting better, we ought to be able to demonstrate that through those symbolic victories. If we can't even get the symbolic victories, right, then I definitely don't want to hear talk of like the more substantive ones, because the symbolic ones usually are going to precede the more substantive ones.
So I asked you the Democrats, your rating there. I asked you the symbolism question, but what about now the Republicans? You have a great piece that you wrote. Ted Cruz is a racist hack. His questions to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson reveal his contempt for black people and the intelligence of us all. Now, hold on. Let's have some fun. Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, Josh Hawley. I think the answer of who the worst person is so clear cut. And I'm super surprised by how people are struggling with this. I realize it's tough. Again, the question is, who's the worst person? And I think it's clear. Tim, who is it?
Of those three?
I think it's clear. Because I think there's a record from one of them that checks off so many of the marks.
I can make an argument for all three. I'm thinking you're probably going to say Lindsey Graham, and I'm probably going to agree with you in some ways, because he's someone who has been so supine in saying one thing and then immediately going back. I mean, I actually have more respect for someone who's been an ideologue from day one. And I think Ted Cruz has been, going back to law school at least. I think Josh Hawley's always been one. I think Lindsey Graham is someone who's a worse person, though, because he doesn't even have the courage of his convictions. That would be my moral standard.
Unfortunately, you're wrong. It's Ted Cruz. Yeah. And I don't need to explain myself.
Okay. I mean, I think, okay. He's shittier. That's fine. I'm okay. Look, I am okay with whatever the judgment is. Because
Lindsey Graham, let me defend Graham. Never abandoned his state during while it was frozen. He was a JAG officer. He knows how to make a honey baked ham. Now, I mean, one of the criteria is that Donald Trump attacked his father and his wife, and he still supported him. But to be fair, he attacked Lindsey Graham too. So, hey, it doesn't matter. More importantly, let's get to Ted Cruz and your essay.
I mean, I think what was so disturbing about Cruz's performance there is, this sort of when your line of attack is, okay, you sit on the board of this private school in D.C., which has put on their website recommended books like Antiracist Baby by Ibram Kendi, as if somehow she is in any way it's like saying, well, they read Hemingway. Do you support alcoholism? Like, do you support beating your wife? Because I think Hemingway did that. He abandoned his kids at one point, like pretty shitty guy. But I don't think she would be asked to answer for Hemingway. I don't think she would be asked to answer for any other sort of famous author, past or present. But because Kendi's black, right, and writing about race, well, let's ask the black lady about this other black guy, because that makes perfect sense. That's appropriate. And so that's what he does. And he does it. And of course, then he completely mangles Kendi's words in the book and the intentionality of them, and is asking her questions that have nothing to do with her judicial philosophy, nothing to do with her job as a judge. He's asking her questions about critical race theory, which she never took. She says, like, I didn't really study it. I don't know. And then he, which was similar to the other attacks about her sentencing history. I mean, all of these things that are all intended to conjure, I think, some very clear stereotypes. In Cruz's case, he's trying to push the button that says, this is a dangerous, radical black woman who thinks like this dangerous, radical black man who hates whitey. Right. So there's that, they all hate whitey. And then for Josh Hawley and all the stuff about pedophilia, not only is he trying to like signal to the QAnon people to keep them in the tent, but it's also about conjuring this image of black people as inherently soft on crime, right? Sort of, they just don't take crime seriously.
And that's not new. Like I was reading, and I'm sure you've written about this extensively. Yeah. That's been in the history of black politicians, that they're going to be soft on crime, which is a whistle. It's code, right?
Well, they did this with Thurgood Marshall. I mean, there's that whole, I read that part of the transcript recently when Marshall was being confirmed during his hearings. That came up, like, don't you think, how do we know you're not going to be soft on these rioters and these black? And it's like, why would you ask that question? Why would you assume that this black person needs to answer for other black people, but you did not ask Brett Kavanaugh? How do we know that you're not going to go easy on drunk white frat boys that rape women? Like, how do we know? Nobody asked that. Nobody asked the question of like, gosh, what do you think about the bell curve? Like Charles Murray, the co-author of the bell curve, is still a conservative in good standing. He rubs elbows with some of the conservatives who are very prominent both in government and in the judiciary. And I don't think any white person who's being confirmed has ever been asked, well, what do you think of the bell curve? Which says black people are like biologically defective in terms of intelligence. Seems to me that is infinitely more offensive than anything in Ibram Kendi's 24-page children's book. Right. But white people are never asked to answer for that. But black folks are asked to answer. Same way, used to happen. Every black person running. I remember when I first got on the road lecturing in 95. It was right around the time of the Million Man March. And it was during the OJ stuff, too. And the questions that I would get would always be about OJ and Farrakhan. And it's like, why do you assume that if I'm talking about race and that means black people, that then I need to be, and then black people would always get that. Like, well, what do you think about Farrakhan? Well, when was the last time that a white politician was like, well, so what do you think about David Duke? Please explain. I'm not even trying to say Farrakhan and Duke are the same, because I don't think they are. Certainly not in terms of power, certainly not in terms of a whole lot of things are different about them. But the point is, we don't even ask that. Like, white politicians are not even asked to weigh in on Pat Buchanan, who's very mainstream historically. But every black person is like, well, what do you think about the Nation of Islam?
Well, it's funny because I'm trying to think of when that does happen. And did you see the video of that lieutenant governor or running for lieutenant governor woman in Idaho who was asked about her appearance with white supremacist Nick Fuentes? And that's not what you're saying, though. You're not.
Yeah, because she actually appeared. Right. It'd be one thing. You would ask that question if someone had been going to events, maybe with Farrakhan. You might ask that. It may or may not be fair. It may not, but you would ask it. You would expect it to be asked. You would expect it to be asked if some candidate were showing up with, guys from the new Black Panther Party, yelling about, or not even the new Black Panther Party, like the Black Hebrew
Obama
Israelites.
with Jeremiah Wright.
Right. Well, that happened.
Yep.
That happened with Jeremiah Wright because he had been at that church, and that was, the church where he had gone and been introduced to the Lord, I guess, is according to the way he talks about it. But yeah, like the Black Hebrew Israelites who scream at white people on the corners in New York City and talk about cracker babies and all that. Like if you were hanging out with them, I imagine you would get asked a question, right? But the point is, white people never get asked those kinds of questions about our associations unless they are very, very clear. And it's like, okay, so Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to Nick Fuentes' thing, and Paul Gosar is going to Nick Fuentes' thing. They're going to get asked about it, but you're not going to get asked that if you're just some rando Republican who happens to be white running for a congressional seat in Maine, unless there's reason. Whereas with her, it's like, you're Black, you went to Harvard. Derek Bell taught at Harvard and taught critical race theory. I bet you are a critical race theorist, and you're on the board of Georgetown Day School, a deliberately progressive private school like the one Ted Cruz's daughters go to. And therefore, you probably vet everything they put on their reading list. Well, no, board members of private schools do not get involved in those decisions. They are raising money. That's what they do. They raise money. They host events. But they don't get into like, what are you teaching in that 3rd grade class? How about the 7th grade class? And of course, it's a private school where people who go to GDS, and I've spoken at GDS many times, every parent that goes there knows full well what the politics of that school are. And as a result, they know what they're signing up for. And sometimes when they're not comfortable with it, they'll send their kids to Sidwell Friends, which also has done some progressive stuff, but they're generally seen as a less radical school. That's where the Obamas ended up sending their daughters, because I think they didn't want to be, they were afraid of being tarred by, pun very much intended, being tarred by GDS as Black people. Like, oh, wait, we don't know about this. They're going to think we're radicals because we're sending them to GDS. So we'll just send our kids where, the Clintons sent Chelsea, right? Which was to Sidwell Friends. And so there's always that discussion happening within the DC political class, because everybody knows GDS is a left-leaning school. But that's the point. They know. So if you go there, so what are you saying, Ted Cruz? You shouldn't even be allowed to make that choice for your own kids. It's one thing to say public schools, it's public dollars, we shouldn't be subsidizing critical race theory, which of course is not really happening. And that's a whole nother conversation. But what he's saying is even worse than that. He's saying, no, even if you want to pay $40,000 for the privilege of a private education, you still shouldn't be learning this. It's fascinating.
Before I let you go, I got to ask you about your piece, which I think has gotten really undercovered, and maybe there was only a few high-profile instances of this recently, but it's so important and so relevant. It happened right here in our community or the school nearby. This piece is titled, "What's Up with All the Racism at Sporting Events?" And you say it's hard to miss these stories. They seem to be everywhere across the country, in supposedly liberal states and conservative ones, small towns and larger towns. White sports fans are behaving badly, from fans taunting and making monkey noises at Black high school basketball and hockey players in Minnesota, to multiple stories of similar simian sounds and slurs being used against Black high school athletes in Michigan, to similar monkey impersonations and slurs at girls' soccer match in California, to an announcer calling Black players thugs for a hard but legitimate foul in a basketball game in Idaho, to Catholic schoolboys from Cincinnati chanting anti-Black and anti-Asian slurs at players of color. These stories pour forth from around the country. Those are just a couple of examples, all of which you link to. A really important piece. And you write, the obvious question, Tim, is why? So maybe, and then you lay out several points in this piece that we won't be able to get to, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think obviously part of it is the lowering of the threshold for acceptable expressions of bigotry that we can trace to Trumpism. Yeah. It's not that there's more racism now, but I do think that when you call countries shithole countries and you make excuses for blatant racism, it lowers the threshold for people who've always been thinking that stuff. And in one sense, there's a benefit to that, right? We can see who you are now. So thank you for showing us. On the other hand, the fact that Black and brown athletes and white athletes on those teams are having to deal with that kind of abuse is obviously not okay. And the fact that schools are not handling this, they're protecting the identities of the kids, which I understand in criminal situations you have to because of the way juvenile law operates. But these people are not being criminally sanctioned. I don't see any reason why we can't know who they are. I don't see any reason why we need to protect, bigots who are yelling racist things at people in school. Somebody ought to out them. If it's their classmates, maybe the principal can't do it. Their classmates ought to say, I know who did it. It's this person. I want to know, because I don't think kids that do that kind of stuff need to be able to just act like it didn't happen. And now I'm going to go off to college and just do my thing. And nobody's going to know what kind of a horrible human being I am. Because, I just think that's over the line, and we're seeing it over and over and over again. And I'm sure it happened, before Trump. Obviously, there were cases of it happening before, but it's clearly getting worse, and very little is being done. In fact, in some of those cases that I mentioned, and that was only after like four pages deep
exactly.
on Google.
So much more.
If I had time to go 10 pages deep, I would have found other cases like the one you're talking about around your
Pearl
community.
River. Look it up. Pearl River High School in Rockland County. Yeah.
Right. There's a bunch of them that I didn't even find. And in many cases, the school district or the school is making excuses, trying to deny that it even happened. Oh, well, we're not sure that was really racism. We think you might have misheard. And then you find out 3 weeks later when the headlines have faded, oh, it actually was, it happened. I think we do need to be asking, why is it that right now those things are happening and the right is making it sound like the worst thing happening in schools is anti-racist education? Clearly, we don't have too much anti-racist education. We have too little anti-racist education. That's why that shit is happening. If we were doing our job, that wouldn't be happening, right? In those communities. And
you
yet
also,
it is.
One point you make, which I think every point's great, but you're right. Isolation breeds contempt. Only when we begin to live more integrated lives might we see real and lasting progress when it comes to the expression of racism and its acceptance by so many. I just don't know how we can do better about that, how we can force people to mix more, be integrated more, live, work, and worship more.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, legally and probably practically, you can't force that. But I do think if we really want to put an end to this, it's going to require that, because you're not going to engage in that kind of behavior or tolerate it if it's aimed at people who you know and you care about and who are your friends. I've told you the story before, at least I've told lots of other people on the radio about this and in speeches, that one of the most formative things in my life was being 11 years old and going outside Nashville for a baseball scrimmage with my team, which was all black except for me and like two other guys, and having this white team refuse to play us because they didn't want to play against black kids. And we had to get back in the car and come back to Nashville, and they were threatening us with baseball bats and surrounding the vehicle. And we were all crammed into the coach's car and threatening to beat our ass and calling the black kids the N-word, calling the white kids N-word lovers. And it was an incredibly horrific moment for my friends and for me, but it was also a bonding moment, because it was that moment that I realized, like, there are white people who desperately want to put me on the other side of my own community, quote unquote, just simply because of my connection to black people. And I think if white folks, I don't want anyone to have that experience, but I think if white folks saw that happen and understood and actually had connection to black people when that happens, because if you're just a spectator in the crowd and you see that happen, you might be appalled because, oh my gosh, what a terrible thing. And that's tacky. And, but it's like my mom's reaction to like the violence during the sit-ins. It wasn't that she was in favor of the segregationists. She just was like, oh, it's also tacky. But she didn't really have close friends who were black. So to her, that was like some abstraction. So like if you're in the stands and that kind of racism is being hurled at black people, but you don't really know any, you might abstractly think, well, this is a terrible thing. But if that's your friend, you're going to get up and you're going to say something, and you're going to get in someone's face and challenge that behavior. But you're not going to do that for an abstraction.
Yes, and if
you're not going to do that for a book you read,
even if it's not, I think if you have had people in your life from more diverse backgrounds that are really in your like close personal friends, family members, even if they're not there, and you see that behavior happening, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Like you can't, you feel their pain even though they're not there, because they're your loved ones. And so you have that empathy that's already in place that too many people, I think, just don't have, because they're not exposed to enough diversity, unfortunately.
Right. No, it's true.
Well, listen, I'll let you go. I love talking to you. I wish you could keep going. I got to get my daughter, but this is, great work as always, Tim. And we got to do that live event soon. You got to come by.
Man. Let's make that happen. I would absolutely.
I'll hit stop, and then we'll talk about when that can happen. Thank you very much, sir.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, Tim Wise, everybody. Hope you didn't mind that we went back in history 2 weeks to talk about and get his reaction to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. There's still so many people whose takes I want to get and interpretations I want to hear, and Tim is always great. and I loved it. At Tim Jacob Wise on Twitter. Go tweet him right now. Support him on Medium, on Patreon, and everywhere else. Go buy his books. And thanks as well to Bill B in D.C. parking his garages. And I will be back to the normal format for tomorrow's show. I hope you, I appreciate you letting me have a little bit of time off and not busting my chops. You guys are so supportive. A lot of new subscribers signing up just in the past week alone. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And I will talk to you tomorrow, and John Carroll will sing us out right now.
Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.